We're just gonna jump right into it. I have 27 decks from Perils in Paradise that'll help you hit legend, have fun, or make your opponent as miserable as possible. And the most exciting part about this video is that there are no Reno decks. So if you want to play a Reno deck, here are my suggestions. Reno Warrior, Reno Druid, go and find them on HS Guru. I'm not giving you a list. And if you appreciate all of these deck ideas, don't forget to hit that sub button because as I said, I have 27 decks that I have to go over for this video, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about each particular deck because there will be videos about a lot of these decks coming out as long as I can get clips for them. So yeah, we're going to go over my picks for the top 10 decks in the meta right now that'll shape the legend meta. Then I will go over the best decks to potentially hit legend because I have a lot of hot takes, I have a lot of opinions about some of these decks, and well, we're just going to get right into it. The first deck that I believe is on top of the meta is the typical Tempo Druid, but honestly, I don't believe this is the best version of Tempo Druid, and this is going to be starting, the top 10 best decks and Legends, best archetypes, and honestly, this is kind of tied for first place with another Druid deck that's very similar, but Doom Kitting your opponent is still extremely powerful in this metagame. They are probably going to have to look at Druid because ramping is just way too efficient because of cards like New Heights. New Heights is now playable in Warrior as well, and this is just absolutely unbelievable that ramp is now a problem in two classes. Go figure, right? So New Heights is absolutely pushing the game to absolute new heights because now your Trog Gem Tosser can deal 13 damage. And before anybody tells me it's like, oh man, this card is like super expensive, like how are you going to be able to spend 13 mana and then have this at the end of that chain? I'll tell you right now, it's not that hard. So dealing 13 damage, dealing 16 damage with this card has been some of the most disrespectful stuff that I have seen for a while, and that's not even getting into the Ziliax combination that's in this deck to where, people are running the elusive module in literally every single Ziliax, even in a deck that doesn't even run Hydration Station. But then there's a complete other problem that we have. Concierge Druid. Like, again, Hydration Station isn't even really a problem in Druid, in my opinion, because Druid has so many other powerful things that it can focus on to where, yes, you could play a Taunt Druid in like a control fashion, play Hydration Station, and completely lock out your opponent with a bunch of Ziliaxes, but you don't even need to do that. Concierge has actually taken the top of Legend as I'm recording this video, because Go With The Flow and Seabreeze Chalice is just absolutely busted, and when you pair that with another Tidepool Pupil to give you another Chalice, it really is game breaking. And then you have, Swipe in order to remove the field very effectively with like potentially plus 3 spell damage to deal 4 damage to the entire field. It's very likely that Seabreeze Chalice is going to go face for just enough damage in a lot of situations. We're not even talking about the rest of the deck with, still dragons, the ramp package. This is just a deck that tutors out everything with Take to the Skies to draw out your dragons. You still have Splish Splash Whelp, even as a 3-mana card, is still insanely good. Watch them nerf this card to a 3-mana 2/1. It's probably gonna happen. It's just, this is one of the best decks, if not the best deck in the meta right now, and it just goes to show how Druid, if you give it enough ramp, it's gonna do disgusting things. So yeah, unfortunately, Druid might need some attention if this deck doesn't get curbed back in the next couple of days. Also, just gotta throw this out there. Rip Ecor, because unfortunately, he was kind of right about this deck, and you gotta give him points for that. Next up, we have Mining Rogue, and it does actually change up a little bit because we have 2 new cards that find its way into this deck, 2 new legendaries. We have Grifta, which makes sense because you have 1-mana amulets that work really well with Sonya, and you could also think about it this way, it being 4 mana, you could play 1-mana Scoundrel into 1-mana Grifta to play 2 Griftas and then get 4 amulets depending on how much mana you have and, your Sona shenanigans that are enabled, because good lord, there's even more Sonya shenanigans. And speaking of shenanigans, Maestra is apparently finding its way into this deck for one simple reason. If you transform your hero, you get to replay all of your rogue cards with your Tess Greymane. So if you transform your hero from a rogue to like a warlock, for example, when you play Tess, you're going to recast all of your rogue cards. So imagine recasting like Breakdance on Tess a bunch of times to where if you've played a bunch of other cards that are non-warlock in this situation with like with Scorpion and stuff from like Velarok, then there's a possibility you could like keep cycling that Tess over and over again. How likely is this? I don't think it's all too consistent, but I mean, Mining Rogue just has a way of finding the perfect options every single time, and who knows, maybe this idea is cool, but hey, it utilizes the Taurus card. There's another reason why it's in the deck to enable the Party Fiend, but I mean, hey, Party Fiend is a really good card on turn 1, and that's one reason why people are going down this this route with Mining Rogue. But I thought it was a really interesting synergy to point out, because Maestra is not really getting a lot of conversation surrounding it, even though hero cards from the past are really cool if you get a Guff, but generally speaking, they're not the reason why you win the game. Next up, we're going to have the Hydration Station Warrior, to which someone was able to reach rank 1 legend with this deck. There are 3 decks or 4 decks that I believe that someone was able to reach rank 1 legend with, and unfortunately, Zilliaxes are going to be on the way if you're climbing, man. Like, Hydration Station Zilliaxes is something you're going to have to realize is it game winning? You'll have a chance afterwards. Just concede, go to the next game, man, because when this happens, it really does lock out a lot of decks, and it is even more enabled by the ramp that is in Warrior as well as Chemical Spill. Go ahead and apologize to this card right now, because we all thought this card was absolutely busted, right? The only way of utilizing this card in the previous expansion was maybe some kind of stupid like Grom OTK, and even then that wasn't even enough damage to deal 30. So Chemical Spill, absolutely terrible card in Wizbag's Workshop, but it is steaming meat and clapping ham like another, like, it's just crazy how good this card is now. So yeah, Chemical Spill stonks went up massively, and now it's all about just cheating out the Zilliax so you can bring it back with Adventure Boom and Hydration Station a bunch of times. Marin makes all the cards 0 mana, depending on how you draw them, but you've also got All You Can Eat, Trail Mix, and New Heights as fantastic cards to enable the consistency that is this deck. And in the ETC, you have cards like Dirty Rat to help you around combo, All You Can Eat for that consistency, and Boom Boss in case you want to be an asshole. So yeah, Warrior's looking really good right now. The stats on this deck are kind of going downward, but if you are trying to climb to Legend and you want to bully some aggro decks, this is a very effective way of doing that. And next up, we have Spell Mage. There is not a lot of development with this deck, but there is one key synergy that we have to keep in mind. So the new cards that find its way into this deck are going to be the Druid cards, Go With The Flow and Seabreeze Chalice. See what I did there? We have those Druid cards as well as Tide Pools in order to give us more random cards, more random outs. There's a lot of spells that are being cast, so this is essentially just 3 mana, discover 3 cards as you cast your own cards. So that just seems really good for a deck that sometimes needs to discover some random outs in order to get over that hump. Sometimes it just doesn't have enough damage and it just needs to find a fireball for lethal. So that's really good. But one other synergy to keep in mind is Elemental Companions. Now, obviously, this card has been talked about a lot because spell damage and discounting your cards are very effective. Let's not talk about the third option. This doesn't exist. But specifically with this deck now, you have Hifar, we're going to call him Jafar. You have Jafar into all of your 1 mana cards, and specifically with Go in the Flow, with Go in the Flow and Seabreeze Chalice. That is really good. Like, let's say turn 5, you have like the absolute high roll, and you have double Elemental Companion, double Go with the Flow, and double Seabreeze Chalice. You play Elemental Companion, and you get a Jafar and spell damage guy. I'm not going to try and read these names. So you already have all your spells costing 1 less and +2 spell damage. You now have +4 spell damage thanks to the Go with the Flow, and now your chalices are dealing 6 damage each. That's 6 procs. That's a lot of damage by turn 4. Now, granted, that is a high roll circumstance, but that is something that can happen. And even if it's not turn 5, you can still just do this later in the game. So yeah, Spell Mage looking really terrifying with that particular synergy. Seabreeze Chalice and Go with the Flow. Because I thought these cards were unplayable in Mage. But Spell Mage is now a good deck that is not really changed all too much, but seems to get a lot of gas from these new cards. Next up, we have Custom Warlock, Pain Warlock. It's good. How was Warlock, how is it not going to be good this expansion when literally it was given Party Fiend, Cursed Souvenir, as well as Fearless Flame Juggler all in one expansion? Like, I thought we wanted Zulok to be good, but Blizzard was just like, hey, we're gonna just make Pain Warlock the only way of playing this archetype. So it's kind of sad that if you want to play an aggressive Warlock deck, you are still all in on playing your Giants, your Horrors, and your 0 mana Zilliaxes. But yeah, this deck is just absolutely busted because of these new cards giving us even more ways of damaging ourselves to enable even more synergies for these Giants, for these horrors, as well as Infernal just ending games because he puts you back to 15. So yeah, there's not really a lot to talk about with this deck. I may not even make a video about it because it's not really worth talking about, because essentially it's the same deck. It just has even more stat bombs with Fearless Flame Juggler, and this card is really powerful if you can time it well. But yeah, there's not really a lot to talk about with Warlock, unfortunately, because it's all in on Pain Warlock, because the Death Rattle cards, they're fun, but they really aren't that good right now. And going down the aggressive train, we have Pirate Demon Hunter, and I believe a lot of people have been playing some bad lists, but I will tell you right now, Spirit of the Team as well as Parched Desperado 100% should be in this deck, because you are just trying to kill your opponent as quickly as possible. Yeah, the Pirate synergies are great, but cards like South Sea Captain, for example, are just way too slow, unfortunately, because it's just better to give the minion an actual buff. Hosen Roughhouser, you essentially use the exact same way with South Sea Captain, but the difference is when this card dies, the minions don't lose the buff. So unfortunately, all in on Pirates is not really the way I would suggest playing this deck. Putting in a going down swinging is absolutely massive, especially with cards like Burning Heart. So that way you can deny taunt minions and big boards. You can keep your boards healthy, and you can, enable your Zilliax shenanigans. And you also have Kayn in order to deny taunts anyway. But you only have one Kayn, and the second copy for going down swinging is really good in this situation to give you two cards that can maybe deal with a large board. Because this deck really does fall behind if it does not dominate the board in the first two turns. So that's one reason I particularly don't like it. But if you don't exactly want to play all-in aggression, there's another way you could try to build this deck. And I gotta be honest, I'm not sure if this is going to be like a good deck, but it's pretty much this exact same idea, except now we have Aranna Thrillseeker to specifically run cards like Brain Masseuse and Acupuncture. So there's also a possibility that you could play Aranna and do some kind of like stupid combo with like Brain Masseuse into Through Felon Flames to attack it to a big minion, and if that goes face, then bam, that's lethal right there. Again, a lot more of a high roll. It's probably a little bit less consistent because this deck has a little bit more ways of getting you killed, because if you play the Brain Masseuse and your opponent plays a Golganeth and Shaman and they deal 20 damage to this card, you are going to receive that 20 damage to the face. So this is not an endorsement to play this deck if you want to grind up and if you want to, hit legend, but this is an interesting take on an archetype that I am just personally not a fan of, because I just don't like hyper aggressive decks. I just don't know what else to say. And next up, we have Elemental Rogue. That's right, conversation around Lamplighter is super hilarious in my opinion, because everybody is talking about how it's completely busted in Rogue. And there are people that are going so far to say that they should give Elusive to Lamplighter, so that way you cannot cast spells on it, so therefore you cannot cast Shadow Step on it. And honestly, I don't know if I want this change, because I like this deck. I'm sorry, I'm a degenerate combo player, and I've seen, people be like, I hate this deck, and other people be like, you know what? A deck like this is fine. If I want to deal 100 damage by turn 11, turn 12, you should have killed me in those first 11 turns. You know what I mean? So it's like, a deck like this existing isn't necessarily a bad thing in my opinion, because keep in mind, this is one of the only decks that can consistently deal with like all of the Zilliax shenanigans. So it's like, there is some good that comes from a deck like this existing, but some people just want Rogue to suffer because Shadow Step is a card that makes them upset, and they can have that opinion. I'm not going to take that away from them. Shadow Step is a very infuriating card because of how flexible it is in Rogue, but that's exactly why I love it. I love the flexibility, and honestly, if it wasn't for Shadow Step, like, this kind of deck couldn't exist. But if you want to go in a little bit of a different approach, because there is another way of building this deck, you could decide to run more elementals in this list. But cards that I feel like 100% have to be run this list are cards like Dubious Purchase, Quick Pick, and other draw cards, because you just need to cycle through the deck. And that's what the other version, the other list was really good at doing. It's just all about cycling through, but there are times where it doesn't feel like there are enough elementals. So this deck also has gone with the approach of going for more tempo cards, like playing a Flame Revenant on turn 2 in order to make your other elementals a little bit larger. So I think that's a really good approach to this deck, to try to play it more mid-range and more like aggressively, I guess. So that way, if you do need to play like 2 Lamplighters for lethal, that's a lot easier than having to like build up this win condition over the course of like the entire game. Instead, you can just play for tempo. But one card in particular that I feel like is 100% core in this deck is definitely the Sweetened Snow Flurry, because it gives you other tools to stall the game. It gives you 2 elementals that are really, really impactful. And let's not forget that you have prep in the deck, so even if these spells are expensive from this card, you still have ways of discounting them. But I really like this archetype, even though I gotta be honest, I'm going to go over my thoughts later in the video about this, but I think elemental decks outside of Rogue are absolutely trash. And maybe that's because I played Elemental Rogue before playing the other ones, but yeah, this deck is in my top 10 recommendations for climbing in Perils in Paradise, because it's just good, it's fun, and it's a new way of playing Rogue, and we're actually playing minions and doing something. Next up is a deck that I have not tested yet, but I am hearing a lot of buzz about Nature Shaman, specifically because Tidepool Pupil is just a fantastic card in the deck. It's not even because this enables a win condition or gives you like even more burst. It's just because it's such a flexible tool. Imagine like you have to play your second Flash of Lightning, and then you have the Tidepool Pupil enabling a third one that is the reason why you win the game. It's just a flexible card. Let's say you need to get another draw 2, another Lightning Bolt for lethal, Conductivity, because unfortunately you had to use Conductivity to remove a board in order to stay alive. Like, there's a lot of flexibility with a deck like this, and Norwis is back on the Nature Shaman train, and I've received a lot of comments being like, Clark, have you thought about Nature Shaman? Is Nature Shaman good? Do the new cards really support Nature Shaman? And I hate to say it, the new cards for Nature Shaman are trash, except for Pupil. The only reason this was put into the pool was to make Lightning Reflexes a worse card, and I hate that I know this is why they put it in the game. Like, I haven't had any confirmation about it, but I can promise you this was only put into the game in order to make Lightning Reflexes worse, to try and bring down Nature Shaman. But you can't bring down the Nature King, so if you want to play this deck, it's probably still a very powerful archetype. And I did die on turn 6 the first time I went up against this deck, but it's just not all too common because I don't believe people are aware of the sauce. But if you want to play Nature Shaman, it's a good deck right now. I would highly recommend it. We got 2 more decks on this list, and we are going to go over Overheal Priest. We're just going to keep that in there because that's a funny little tidbit. But one thing that I want to point out is that a lot of people were trying to enable Vol'jin as well as Parrot Sanctuary. I almost called it Parachute Sanctuary. But yeah, Parrot Sanctuary with this deck is actually not that bad of an idea because there are some pip shenanigans that you can do in this deck. I really don't know a lot about this, but there were people that were testing this during the first week. I don't really know how good it is, but just throwing that out there in case you want to do your own research and maybe break the meta yourself, because Overheal Priest is still seeing a lot of play right now, and I really don't understand why, because this is pretty much the exact same list, except the only new card we are running is going to be the Grifta. And Grifta makes sense in this deck because you can steal your opponent's minions to make the Adonis go face a little bit more consistently. There might be ways of just, getting more resources, dealing damage, healing yourself, discounting your hand. Yeah, there's actually a lot of utilization to this card. Discounting Adonis to a 3-mana card, absolutely busted, by the way. But yeah, another thing to keep in mind is that the Parrot Sanctuary also works with Adonis. So that's another reason that people are trying to make this work. I don't know how good this actually is, but one thing to keep in mind, and it's really surprising to me that Priest is not more prevalent in the meta, but you can use Aman'Thul to get rid of a Ziliax. It's your only tool of maybe deleting it for the rest of the game, but that's why a lot of people are playing Priest at the beginning, but its win rate is not looking good on HSReplay right now. And the last deck that I will be going over is Base Rainbow. Unfortunately, Rainbow DK is still going down the exact same approach it was at the end of the expansion, except now we have Eliza Goreblade and Ghoul's Knight enabled in the deck to give us more corpses to work with, more corpses to spend, but it's very sad that we're still not playing Climactic Necrotic Explosion. We are just playing a control deck that is aiming to play Hell Yeah, run out our opponents with a bunch of minions and pressure with the board, so that way the plagues will also wear them down as the game progresses even longer. So yeah, this is just one of those decks that's very unfortunate because I love this card. Whenever I see this card taken out of Rainbow DK, I'm like, where did we go wrong? Where did this train run off the tracks, man? I'm not happy about this whatsoever. But yeah, Climactic Necrotic Explosion, if you wanted to put it into the deck, I hate to say it, but you could probably cut like a Ghouls Knight or like the Eliza, because I feel like the Eliza is just really not all too good. But if you do have situations where you stick minions and that is the whole purpose of your deck, this card could be good, especially if you could like Death Growl it. But I've tried these decks, I've tried these ideas. They just aren't consistent enough because they're way too slow and they're way too dependent on specific draws. But yeah, if you want to play Rainbow DK without the Climactic Necrotic Explosion, this is a deck that Theo has been playing and has had some success with, but unfortunately, it just doesn't run, it doesn't run the card. It makes me sad. And now we're going to be talking about the decks that you could take from the Diamond ranks to the Legend ranks. And unfortunately, I have some bad news and I got to share my opinion about this deck because I feel like Elemental decks are trash. But they are performing very well from Diamond to Legend because, simply put, playing a minion, having it stick, and then going face, as well as having, you know, Lamplighter combinations for insane amounts of damage, simply works at the lower ranks because you just need a deck that does something and does it well. And Elemental Shaman makes a board and adds pressure very well. We actually see Azure Knight Giant seeing some real play, like Azurite, whatever this card is called. I don't care. Go ahead, make fun of me in the comments. In fact, go ahead right now, make the comment, Clark HELLSCREAM can't read, because I've been having some issues reading recently. I'm not even gonna lie about that. You should have seen me take my previous video where I was going over the announcement for Blizzard. I had to chop that up a whole bunch of times. Go ahead. Clark HELLSCREAM can't read down the comments right now. But the Giant does see play. You have big minions that just hit the face for a bunch of damage, and Scar as well as Lamplighter are your big tools for lethal in order to try and close out the game. So it's just a very effective deck. Whether or not this is the perfect 30, I'm not 100% sure, but really, you know how you build this deck? Bam. Just put in 30 elementals and put in a Magatha, or put in 29 elementals and put in a Magatha, and the deck is perfect. So yeah, Mental Shaman, if you're mental enough to play it, give it a try. And I do have more elemental decks for you, but first I gotta show you this other Shaman deck because it really is weird. I don't know how else to put it. I have not had success with this deck at all, but I have seen a bunch of other people have success with it on their streams. Zeddy was talking about it very highly on one of his YouTube videos the other day. Fino, I believe, is the one that created this particular list, and you gotta give respect to the wave of nostalgia. Now, granted, I did just find this on HS Guru, so I don't know 100% who started this. Like I said, I think it was Fino, but wave of nostalgia is actually a really good idea with this deck, because if you're going up against, say, a warrior that doesn't play a lot of minions, you can actually get 3 guaranteed legendaries from the past with Sigil of Skydiving if you play this on turn 3 or turn 4, depending on the coin. So yeah, that's a really cool synergy that can scam some games for you. But the main way this deck is trying to win is just by bonking you with a gigantic Horn of the Windlord with cards enabling your attack shenanigans like Adrenaline Fiend, as well as Turn the Tides for a bunch of Wind Fury damage. I have to admit, I was very disappointed with Skirting Death. It is not the powerhouse card that I thought it was, especially with Conductivity. And even Cabaret Dancer is kind of a letdown in my opinion, because I thought this card would be fantastic, but kind of similar to Holy Paladin. The ideas are there, but you just don't have the time or the survivability in order to throw out these cards, enable this combo, and then do a gigantic turn to win the game. So it's kind of sad, and I was gonna make a video talking about, you know, like Cabaret Headliner as well as like Sandart Elemental shit synergies, but the deck just isn't good. I would not recommend it. If you want to play, you know, an aggressive version of Shaman, this would be my recommendation, because Pirates work really well as an aggressive tool to end the game very quickly, and then you have the Wind Fury shenanigans in order to just dominate the late game. But then you also have the Wave of Nostalgia as an actual scam win condition. So I believe there's a lot of things going for this deck, but you may have some trouble getting this deck to work at times, because I gotta be honest, I'm not really winning a lot with most Shaman archetypes, except for one deck in particular that we will be talking about. I'll give you a hint. It's Incindius Shaman. That's right, Incindius Shaman is on this list, but it's not in the best decks to climb to Legend, unfortunately. And continuing the mental train, we have Elemental Mage, and whether you guys want to believe it or not, this is a deck that is doing very well at top 1000 Legend, and personally, I don't understand why. I really don't get it. I've tried playing elemental decks and none of them have worked for me. So maybe there's a skill issue, maybe I'm just too dumb and I don't understand how simple tempo mid-range decks work. But yeah, Elemental Mage is seeing play at top 1000 Legend, and it's because Lamplighter really is just that good of a card that is pushing over Elemental decks into legitimate Hearthstone ideas. To where, you know, you could climb with this from Diamond to Legend if you really wanted, because all you need to do is just play an Elemental, draw your deck, and then throw Lamplighter to the face. Now, granted, you do have some other cards in Mage that are very good with the Elemental synergies, such as the Tainted Revenant to deal 7 damage potentially to the face if there is no board, or to clear a board if you need to get rid of some small minions. You also have Unchained Guardian that could draw a bunch of elementals for you, because if you have the Aqua Archivist, then you just draw a bunch of cards out of nowhere, because you can just play a bunch of elementals out of nowhere. Now granted, I haven't had this happen yet, but it seems like a really sweet idea. So if you want to play an elemental deck and just go, you know, play a minion, it does something, it goes face, this is a great deck to play. But I have another take on Elemental Mage that might be a little bit more interesting if you want the deck to have more random outs or random possibilities. This was a deck that was sent to me by a viewer named PYX that makes it his goal to not only just play archetypes that are weird, but to kind of optimize them. And one thing that he noticed in Elemental Mage in particular is like, you know, we got a lot of minions that do stuff, but there's not a lot of comeback ability with this deck. If we lose the board, it is very hard for us to, you know, take back control and then deal damage and kill them. It's really difficult for this deck to come back, you know what I mean? And just sometimes you need cards like Infinitize the Maxitude to discover an AoE at the right time, so that way it neutralizes the board, so that way you can actually stick your minions. It's a very important tool to have at times. And you also have cards like Gorgon Zormu, which I feel like are hilarious. I gotta put in the deck. I didn't want to take it out. I'm sorry. It doesn't need to be in here, but I want it in here, god damn it, so it's going to stay in here. But you've also got Khadgar. You know, Khadgar for a random Blizzard. Maybe he just gives you 5 turns of fireballs and it's just enough in order to win the game. I don't know. It seems like a good idea. But if you want some random ideas, some random discoveries like using the tide pools, then this is one direction you could take the deck. But again, dude, I'm not really a big fan of Elemental Mage or Elemental decks in general. And I have played 4 different types of Elemental decks. And now you guys are probably thinking, wait a minute. He's talked about Elemental Rogue, Elemental Shaman, and Elemental Mage. What is the next Elemental deck? I gotta be honest with you, you're not gonna like the answer. It's Elemental Priest. Yeah, go ahead, click out the video. I completely understand. That's right, Mental Priest, because you gotta be completely mental in order to play a deck like this. And before you start asking, wait, how do we win? Remember, Priest can make copies of Lamplighter. It's not as good as Rogue, it's not Shadow Step by any means, but you do have ways of duplicating this card with Power Chord Synchronize as well as Creation Protocol, and you can technically tutor the minion from the deck with Bird Watching, but there's a lot of minions in this deck, so it's not that consistent. But yeah, that is something you can do. If you are mental enough in order to play this deck, somebody on Twitter by the name of Alucard, I believe Alucard HS is the one responsible for this. And yeah, he's an avid Priest player. All he does is come up with different Priest ideas. And he was mental enough in order to come up with this idea. And he was absolutely thrilled that I played it on my stream. And I'm going to be honest, it won 2 games. It's got some potential. I don't know. But yeah, have to give a shout out to Alucard for giving me this deck, because I would not be insane enough to create a deck like this. No way, Jose. But yeah, if they give Elusive to Lamplighter, it's not just hurting Rogue. It's also hurting Priest. So I think maybe we should give this card Elusive as quickly as possible. The last 2 decks on the best decks to grind to Diamond are going to be pretty simple. Handbuff Paladin. It doesn't even run any new cards. Not really much to say, but it's good enough, and I had to put it on the list. You could also play Showdown Paladin. So bam, that's actually 30 decks right there because of the 2 decks I gave you at the beginning. Look at how much content I'm giving you guys. 4 days after the expansion, I'm giving you 30 decks to play. So yeah, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. This is the only thing I want to talk about, because I don't want to talk about Handbuff Paladin. So if you haven't subscribed to the channel right now, bam, 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 bam. Hit that button somewhere. I hate Handbuff Paladin. Let's move on. Next up is probably going to be the weirdest meta-relevant DK right now, because I believe this deck is just all about bringing out the rat and having lifesteal and just denying aggro decks. If you remember Excavate DK, it's back. People are playing Dig DK again, and they're just excavating cards, getting lifesteal, and just denying their opponent. This is kind of like the control mid-range deck That's available for DK if you don't want to play the Necrotic Explosion, if you don't want to like actually kill your opponent with Hell Yeah, which I still believe this deck should run a Hell Yeah. I'm not really certain what card to cut, maybe like a Frost Strike or something for that. But I don't know, dude. Like, the longer you want the game to go on, the better a card like Hell Yeah is in your deck. So I feel like you just want this in there no matter what. So feel free to put whatever card in there, but this was someone that was able to reach rank 7 legend with, actually, and I'll be making a video about this if I can get some highlights with it. But this might just be a deck that was popular because of all the aggro decks that people were playing at the beginning. It's not really that good against the Zilliax decks by any means, unless you have a Rezka possibility of stealing the minion, because if you Rezka the Zilliax away, you can easily do that by playing this into a Frost Strike. So maybe you don't cut the Frost Strike for that reason. Maybe you get rid of, like, I don't know, a Rainbow Seamstress, maybe a Dreadhound Handler. But I feel like these cards are very good because they're rush cards. You want to deny early game pressure from your opponent, and these cards are very good at sticking around as well as giving you corpse counters. So yeah. Hell Yeah, unfortunately doesn't find its way into this deck, but Big DK might be better than you originally think. And now the final 7 decks that I have available for you are probably going to be the most interesting or the most toxic decks, depending on what your definition of fun in Hearthstone is. And the first deck that we can all agree upon that is going to be a fantastic card is definitely going to be Incindius Shaman. If I had enough dust in order to craft this deck completely golden, which honestly I might, so I might do that later on stream, I'm probably going to do it. And Jombre, I believe, has created the perfect 30 for this deck, because it's just Control Shaman that has Incindius as a potential OTK. So if you look at this list, you are the absolute nightmare to decks like Demon Hunter if you have the right curve. You have Pop-Up Book in order to deal damage and give yourself taunts. You have Needle Totem to give yourself a card and give yourself armor. Fairy Tale Forest, or even the Melemental in order to either enable your game plan faster or play defensively. And then you have Aftershocks, Baking Volcano in order to remove boards as well as healing yourself. Then you get to hide behind some taunts with Frosty Decor. Then you get to play Golganeth. What I'm describing right now is something that I kind of did to a Demon Hunter the other day, and it was just absolutely brutal. He stuck around. I played Shutter Block into Incindius, and then he was out of there, buddy. And that is the whole point of this deck. You want to play Shutter Block into Incindius in order to shuffle 15 eruptions into your deck. The Incindius will buff all of them to deal 2 damage. So if the Incindius can stick around, then you get a lot of damage. But originally, with shuffling 15 of these eruptions into your deck, dealing 2 damage, that is 30 damage in order to enable enough to kill your opponent. And then you have the Gaslight Gatekeeper, which you can play with the 1 mana Shutter Block to draw your hand 3 times. You shuffle into the deck, you draw your hand back 3 times, and you'll hopefully draw all of those eruptions. Now, one thing you guys got to keep in mind, eruptions work with spell damage. Blood Mage Thalnos, Zapper. So you can potentially make these 2 damage cards deal anywhere to like 5 to 6 damage, depending on how long your Incindius sticks around. So the potential of this deck is absolutely massive. Now, unfortunately, there are a bit of dyssynergies with this deck, because what if you draw all the eruptions before you get to play your spell damage cards? It's something that can happen, so you have to like teeter-totter on this line of drawing most of your deck, but not drawing all of your deck, summoning the Shutter Block into Incindius over 2 turns when you have the time to do it, because if you wait too late and you draw the eruptions, if you're against a warrior, you're not going to be able to kill them, so warrior matchups are really annoying. Anything with a bunch of armor is probably going to be a bit difficult, but if you want to play a fun deck that has very good game against aggro, this is a fantastic deck to play that I would highly recommend, that I am going to be playing as soon as I can pop on stream. This next deck is my personal favorite, but I gotta be honest, it might be the weakest deck on this entire list. It's a really sweet idea. It is a lot better than you think it is, but unfortunately, it is just not suited for this meta whatsoever. But what exactly are you trying to sell me on here, Clark HELLSCREAM? What is this deck idea? It is Aranna Thrill Seeker Fatigue Demon Hunter. The whole point of this deck is to draw out your entire deck, play the Aranna, or potentially bring her back with a Rest in Peace, which is honestly a card that I feel like doesn't really see a lot of play in either Demon Hunter or Priest. But you want to play the Aranna and then draw a bunch of cards with it, with cards like Weight of the World, Paraglides, to just take a bunch of fatigue damage and just send it all to the opponent. And how can we send it all to the opponent? We have cards like Red Card to make their minions dormant, and you can also use this as like a stall card in order to get to this position in the game. You have cards like Eldrazi Warblades, which keep you alive. You can deal damage with it. There's some pressure options here, but you can kind of already see, like, I'm falling apart describing this deck because it's got a lot of really cool synergies, but not all of them really work that well together because this deck just kind of falls apart if it doesn't get its cycle tools. So essentially, you want to play Sigil of Time. You want to draw your deck as quickly as possible. This is a card you have to keep in the mulligan. And then the ultimate high roll is Grifta. You can play Grifta into discount all of the cards in your hand to where almost all the cards are 1 mana. So you can just play your entire hand, play a card like Way of the World to quickly draw out even more cards. Like, there's a lot of potential in this deck. 0 mana momentums with the Eldrazi Warblades, as well as Burning Heart to keep yourself alive. Lifesteal's a powerful weapon. You know, Immolation Aura to clear. Like, there's some really cool things going on here, but this deck is just not that consistent. It's a really sweet idea, but there might be a way of building this where we have to like run like single ofs, like maybe only 1 Weight of the World, for example. I already am running 1 I-Beam, and before anybody says it, yeah, I know I was talking about Glaivetar, but there just aren't enough Outcast cards that are cheap enough. Like, and if you look at this deck, the only Outcast cards that we're actually running outside of the Discovery is Crimson Sigil Runner as well as I-Beam. 1 copy of I-Beam. That's not enough synergy. So it's like, this is a really sweet deck idea that I would highly recommend if you want to play something extremely weird and interesting. But you gotta have your expectations be realistic because this is not a good deck. It's not. As much as I want it to be, it's sweet, but it's not good. And next up, we have Sandwich Warrior. Anybody hungry? Because I want to eat this whale. It's got a lot of meat, and I'm a hungry boy, and I could probably eat an entire whale right now. I didn't eat breakfast. But yeah, maybe if you can't have some whales, you can at least have some rye sandwiches, and I'm not really a big fan of rye bread, but I am a big fan of this deck right here. And 1 card that I feel like absolutely needs to go in Sandwich Warrior, in case you haven't seen my video talking about it, is Rockmaster Voon. Rockmaster Voon needs to be core in every sandwich deck from here on out, so that way you don't have to feel bad about drawing the minions unless you don't have the hand space to enable it. That's one thing to keep in mind. If your hand space is kind of bad, then maybe Rockmaster Voon isn't the greatest, but you have to throw out cards. You have to, you know, manage your hand space if you're going to utilize this card to its fullest potential. But the idea behind it is, say you have a bunch of minions in your hand and you play the Rye Cleaver and you have that slice of bread. All of the minions are on the wrong side of the sandwich and you need to, you know, stack it up in the right way. So you can play Rockmaster Voon to add those minions to the other side of the sandwich because you're getting another hand of those minions. It's absolutely ingenious. Then you get to swing the Rye Cleaver, get that second piece of bread, and now you have that sandwich when originally you would have died starving. So it's an ingenious idea. Now, one thing I have to recommend, if you want this deck to be a bit better but less fun, take out the Thunderbringer and take out the Monstrosity. It is really important that Chemical Spill sometimes hits the Ziliax to enable the Hydration Station and Inventor Boom ideas, and there have been times where, unfortunately, Monstrosity has gotten in the way of the Chemical Spill hitting the Ziliax, and the only reason why the Thunderbringer's in the deck is because it can summon out the Monstrosity. And there's another argument that where, you know, you run all you can eat. These are 2 minion tribes you don't really need in the deck, so if you want to sub this out for like control tools, like another Brawl, maybe like a Garrosh Gift or something like that, you could realistically run that. But let's be honest, if you're playing Sandwich Warrior, you gotta run the fun cards, right? These are big minions. We want to summon those big minions and have these big turns. So if you want to cut out some of the fun, you technically have that option. Maybe you should run some other bigger minions in this deck, but Sandwich Warrior is at least a bit better than most people want to give it credit because not enough people are playing Rockmaster Voon. We have 4 more decks coming up in this video, and 2 of them were decks I thought were going to be tier 1, and they aren't even close. There is some potential for these decks, but unfortunately they're just completely overshadowed by the meta decks that we're seeing right now with Druid, with Warrior, with Ziliax, with all these aggressive tools. And unfortunately, Tempo Mage does have a high roll with Concierge into a bunch of sunscreens. But unfortunately, this deck is just not consistent enough to play the Raylas into all the Divine Shield synergies and whatnot. Mantle Shaper's a really sweet idea, and this is another deck from Jombre, so huge shout out to Jombre for coming up with these ideas. But unfortunately, they're just not powerful enough. Like, Tsunami hitting face is really cool, but how consistently by turn 8 are you going to be able to play this card and it deals 9 damage? It doesn't really happen, unfortunately. It's a Christmas land type situation that we need to think about more whenever we're reviewing cards, because a lot of people gave this card an insanely good rating. I think I did as well, but I was thinking about its applications more in like a big spell mage, and sadly, I'm not seeing big spell mage like at all. I would put it in this video just to kind of like give you guys ideas if you wanted to play that archetype, but I am not seeing big spell mage like at all. It's kind of sad in my opinion. But yeah, this is how you can utilize the deck. There is a really cool synergy with Tsunami and Frost Color Artist because there are no other Frost cards in your deck, so you can discount that and play it pretty early, which is cool. But again, this deck is just a little bit too slow. The idea of, Slither Spear running with the game is just so important to where you have to buff it almost immediately with cards like Life Saving Aura. Like, the thresholds of this deck are definitely there, but if you don't hit those thresholds, you're immediately losing tempo, and when you lose tempo as a tempo mage, it is very hard to gain it back. I have failed you, my queen. I'm so sorry. I tried. I really did try. I did everything I could in order to support you, in order to keep you in my life, but the truth has to come out. It's not good. Holy Paladin is not good, and it really makes me upset because I was so confident that this deck was going to be a tier 1 deck going into this expansion, but there is simply one freaking mechanic that is bringing this deck behind and is the reason why we can't have success with it. It's armor. Oh my god, the top classes right now not only have armor, but they also have a ramp, so they're outpacing my OTK deck, and this OTK deck is supposed to stop the Druids and the Warriors, but the armor count is really hard to deal with this deck. So there's a different approach that somebody else has taken to where instead of going with like the all in on this OTK drawing and like controlling aspect, they are all in on playing minions. And honestly, at this point, I'm just giving you guys the idea. I haven't tested it. I don't know how good this is, but it does theoretically make sense. If you can't OTK them from 30, then stop trying to OTK them for 30. You can go with this approach of just playing minions, playing Knick-Knack Shack in order to still get this like cycle aspect of your deck. And I'll tell you right now, Knick-Knack Shack into Lightbot is a really good idea in theory. So maybe this works out a little bit depending on how many holy cards that you played, and there's a lot of 1-drops in this deck. So I don't know, doing this on turn 3 and then activating it turn 4, turn 5, it doesn't seem like that bad of an idea to me. But unfortunately, this deck just doesn't scream meta relevant to me because it is a little bit all over the place. Like, I have to OTK my opponent, but I also have to play my early game minions. It seems like a really sweet idea and a cool way of trying to activate like Sandcastle, for example, because I haven't seen anybody utilize this card, even though Sandcastle into a bunch of sunscreens is a really cool idea to keep this minion alive and to keep activating its ability while it's also in a location. But it's just not consistent enough, man. This deck has way too many holes in it, and it just misses turns, and you can't miss a turn in 2024, man. So if you want to play Holy Paladin, check out my previous video if you want all-in OTK or like control. But if you want to play minions and kind of like add some pressure onto the board with cards like Sea Shanty as well as the Flicker Lightbot, then you could try out this deck. But again, Holy Paladin is just not performing, and I'm very sad. I disappointed my queen. These next 2 decks are going to be toxic. But you want to know what? Sometimes toxicity is warranted in the Hearthstone community, and when Ziliax is all over the place, you have to do everything in your power in order to say, fuck you, Ziliax. I'm going to transform you one way or another. I'm going to activate Wave of Nostalgia, or I'm going to play Cliff Dive to bring out Sylvanas to kill the Ziliax and take it for myself. Kologarn is in this deck in order to take the Ziliax in case you can't attack into it and kill it. You have Walking Mountain in order to give yourself healing, which is just a really good card with Cliff Dive in general. And then you have Yogg-Saron as like this final just screw you, Ziliax. I am taking you. This is weird. This is a very, very weird deck. It's not good, but it is just all in on just saying fuck you to Warrior and fuck you to Ziliax. So if you want to ruin somebody's day, go ahead and try out this deck. And I have a very special video that will be showcasing this deck in particular. Huge shout out to Grey Pirate for being responsible for this monstrosity. And yeah, screw Ziliax, man. This is the only way that you could begin to counter it. And before you ask, no, it's not the greatest counter to it. It can still lose to it. But you know what? If they concede after you take the Ziliax, doesn't matter how many games it takes, that's super satisfying. And here we go, the most toxic deck in the game right now. Go ahead, look at it. Tell me I'm wrong, because I'm not. You have Ziliax, obviously, in Druid, which can come out very quickly since you have the Crystal Cluster as well as all of the ramp available in this deck. With the new inclusion of New Heights, I still can't believe they printed out a cracked out version of Wild Growth. It just, my lordy, lordy, lord. It is nuts. This is just a stupid deck, man. Because then you get to play Fizzle with freaking Hydration Station. You have Marin in order to potentially goblet at Hydration Station. Like, it's toxic. It's ridiculous. I can't condone this kind of gameplay. But if you truly do hate your fellow man, there you go. This is the best deck to play. This is the easiest way to get people to uninstall Hearthstone after losing to this. Because, good lord, I do not like this deck at all. And that's why I saved it for last. And even though Reno doesn't even make its way into this list, I said Reno's name at the very beginning, but this deck I saved for the very last. So let that sink in on just how toxic this deck can be. Oh boy, but there you guys go. Those are 30 decks, 30 deck ideas that I have technically given you in this video with 27 deck lists that you can explore during your vacation in Perils in Paradise. As of right now, there are no, like, obvious meta outliers outside of, like, the Druid, for example. I think Druid is just the only deck that is kind of, you know, casting its shadow upon the entire meta, and you kind of have to adapt to it. But hopefully, if there is any kind of, like, major changes that need to be made, Blizzard will be able to make them. But one thing I want to keep in mind is that we need to wait for all of the options to present themselves right now. We are looking at a lot of different decks right now. We have a lot of archetypes that are in the main spotlight of gotta nerf this, gotta nerf that. But I believe we have to gather all of these ideas and then nerf everything all at the same time so we don't have something pop up like a Shopper Demon Hunter to where, oh, we could have nerfed this if we just waited another 2 days, but we were too impatient. So be a little bit more patient when it comes to calling to nerfs. I'll make a video talking about if we need to nerf Ziliax, and odds are, I think Blizzard is probably going to do something to Ziliax in the next week or so. But yeah, Hearthstone is really fun right now. You just got to go up against some friends. You just got to play some archetypes you haven't tried. And, you know, you just got to try a deck you've never tried before. So hopefully you at least find one deck that you can utilize in this video. And if you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and hit that sub button. But thank you so much for making it to the end of this very long deck video, and we will see you for the next one.